Thank you, Elina, and warmly welcome to all on my behalf as well. Gert Biesta, our keynote speaker this year, is Professor of Public Education at Maynooth University, Ireland, Nivos Professor for Education at the University of Humanistic Studies in the Netherlands, visiting professor in LAA, University College and University of Agder, Norway, associate editor of Educational Theory and co-editor of British Educational Research Journal. His research areas include theory of education, citizenship education, and public pedagogy. And he's also author of numerous books, such as Letting Art Teach, Art Education after Joseph Beuys, The Rediscovery of Teaching, The Beautiful Risk of Education, Learning Democracy in School and Society, Education, Lifelong Learning, and the Politics of Citizenship, Chacun Sier, Education, Truth, Emancipation, Good Education in an Age of Measurement, Ethics, Politics, Democracy, and Beyond Learning, Democratic Education for a Human Future. And already from this title, you probably recognized some themes that are very familiar for theorists and practitioners in the field of social pedagogy as well. Professor Biesta does not necessarily himself identify specifically as social pedagogue, but anyone familiar with his books and other texts finds familiar themes, approaches, and theorists often cited in the field of social pedagogy as well, such as Paulo Freire, Hannah Arendt, and Jacques Rancière. And in our newly published textbook on social pedagogy, me and Elina Nivala have used plenty of his ideas as reference, and we have also dedicated one theorist box to him. And it can be said that somehow we have adopted Professor Biesta as a part of Finnish interpretation of social pedagogy, and I hope that you accept this adoption that we have done, I think, without asking your permission. And as Elina already said, today the title of Professor Biesta's keynote speech is Why Teaching Matters, Education, Social Pedagogy and the School. Warmly welcome to the Finnish Conference of Social Pedagogy.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming. I hope you can hear me, but if the sound is not good, wave your arms and we'll try to sort it out. Thanks for being adopted. That's a very nice experience. And thanks for the invitation to be here and to speak here. We already had a very nice, smaller pre-conference yesterday, so that helped me to get a bit into the whole conversation about social pedagogy, and yeah, I'll try to contribute something to that today. I will be speaking in English, and I know that your English is 1,000 times better than my Finnish, so that's good. But there is one little problem, because what we are interested in, pedagogy, actually doesn't exist in the English language. The word doesn't really fit, or it has a very simplistic meaning, whereas in continental traditions it means a lot. So that's something to bear in mind. I'll partly use the word pedagogy, but then I mean pedagogic or pädagogik in German. I'll partly use the word education, but you'll probably see what I try to do with that. We also shouldn't forget that pedagogy is a Greek word, and the original meaning, if I am correct, is that the pedagogue is the slave who brings the children to school. And I think that's actually wonderful. To be a slave is not a brilliant position, but you can say it's a serving position. That's the work that we do as pedagogues. And you can say what we try to do is to bring children to school. We bring other human beings to the place of education. And I'll try to explore what that might mean in my talk. I've written a lot, I've written too much, I think, if you look at the list, and maybe you've encountered some of that. So then you may recognize some of the ideas I will be sharing with you, but I still hope you find them useful for the conversation during this conference. I tend to over-prepare, so there is too much text, but we'll see how we get there. What I'd like to explore, and in a sense it's a very basic question, is what is actually the work of pedagogues, or the pedagogical work. And when we look around us in contemporary education, in schools, outside of schools, we see one message very strongly. I call it here a kind of global consensus, because I travel a lot, and I assume you also travel to places. And in many places I see these kind of ideas, where people say, what's the school, what's education? It's about the effective production of measurable learning outcomes through evidence-based interventions, ideally with a lot of neuroscience in the background, particularly focusing on research on learning. And what we do with that, we measure, and then we can rank, and we can put all schools and all countries in league tables, and PISA is quite big on that. And what we try to do there is to compete for the top position, and to do that we need to think of education as a big effort to control. You probably recognize some of this, and I'm sort of exaggerating it a little. The question is this indeed the desirable future for education? Or is it the road to nowhere? And you may know this song from the Talking Heads. And when you look at the text, it's quite interesting as a critique of contemporary policy that says, we already know where we're going and we just need to go there. But the question is that the direction? I think, speaking from the tradition of pedagogy, which for me also includes a lot of connections to social pedagogy, that it's really important that we put different orientation points on our horizon, our intellectual horizon, our professional horizon, our practical horizon. And one beautiful phrase that I keep coming back to is from Hannah Arendt. This challenge of trying to be at home in the world. I'll come back to this towards the end of the talk, and by then hopefully I've given a bit more content to that idea. But there is something really profound in this short phrase, because you can say, the world is precisely not the home. In order to move into the world, we need to leave the home. But then if we manage to be at home where we're not at home, that's maybe the biggest question for us all as human beings. And I think pedagogy has some work to do precisely in that challenge and that transition. Hannah Arendt is a big thinker. I'm a little thinker. The phrase I like to play with is to say, what is the work we do as educators? What we try to do is to arouse a desire in other human beings for wanting to exist in the world. It's nice to be at home. It may be difficult to be in the world, but to keep helping each other to have a desire for wanting to exist there. Not just to be there, but to be there in a grown-up way. And I'll try to explain a bit more what this means, where grown-upness for me is an old educational idea. Some people might say it's outdated. I think it's really contemporary. Now, to get into the mood of what I'll try to explore, I want to start with a couple of questions. And you can just think for yourself what you might answer to these questions. This is a really interesting one. Why do parents speak to their newborn child, knowing that their child cannot yet understand what they are saying? So why would we actually speak if we know that the one at the other end doesn't speak our language, doesn't understand what we're saying? Interesting question. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. I'll come back to it a little later. Another really interesting question that has been going on for a long time in the field of education is the question, what actually is the contribution that we make as educators? And it's often asked in this way. We know that we are part of the natural world, so that is a part of what happens in our lives. We know that we are part of a cultural and historical world. So there is nature, there is nurture, and then there is education. And for educators, it's really important to ask, well, what do we actually contribute in this setup? If you believe in justice, you could say, let's give 1/3 to each, 1/3 to nature, 1/3 to nurture, and 1/3 to us as educators. But when you see where research is going, there is a really huge pressure to say, actually, nature is the biggest thing. So a lot of people say it's 98% genetic, a bit of environment, and actually, those educators, they could better find a different job because they hardly make a difference. So an interesting question. Which percentage do we want to claim? Which percentage could we claim? I'll come back to that one as well. And then I have two more historical examples that I think help us to reveal something about our work as pedagogues. I don't know whether you recognize this woman. It's Rosa Parks, who in 1955 stepped on a bus in Alabama and was asked by the driver to move to the back of the bus, and she refused to do so. And you can say, well, if the task of education is to learn people to read, something must have gone wrong, because there was a clear sign in the bus, white forward, colored rear, and Rosa Parks, for some reason, wasn't able to decode that. So failure in terms of literacy education. Here's another guy, don't know whether you recognize him. He's not listening to his iPod, but this is Adolf Eichmann during the trials in Jerusalem. And what was really interesting about Eichmann, who was responsible for organizing the transport of Jews and others to the concentration camps, is that when he was asked, "Are you guilty?" he said, "I was just following orders." So in terms of education, you can say, well, this is a really success case because he really learned to listen well to what other people said. But you can see what from one angle looks like success or failure, there is something missing. What is missing is really nicely articulated by a German pedagogue, Dietrich Benner, who to this question, what's the contribution of nature, of nurture and education, gives a very remarkable answer. Because he says we can argue about the percentage of our biological makeup and the percentage of the environment, but he says together these two are always 100%. And when I read this for the first time, I thought, this is strange. Here is one of the big professors of education, and he is giving education away. He gives, say, education 0%. It's nature and nurture together 100%. But he does something brilliant, and the examples of Rosa Parks and Adolf Eichmann actually support this point, where he said, the question of education is not about influences that make us who we are. The question of education, the focus, I would say, in our work as pedagogues, is the question how out of this an I can step forward. And then we can see very interestingly that Rosa Parks did step forward. So she said, yes, I can read, but I refuse to be any longer part of a society that organizes itself in this way. So there was nothing wrong with her literacy education, but something important happened where she stepped forward as an I. Adolf Eichmann, on the other hand, also was the outcome of nature and nurture, so he learned a lot, probably. But at the moment when people asked him, and where were you in all this? He said, I am not here. I have nothing to do with this. I am not responsible. And this is really interesting also about Benner's point, that he says our work as educators is of a different order. So these questions about nature and nurture are not our questions. The question of the I who emerges from that you can say is our question. And I really like that for all kinds of reasons. So you can say the question which natural and social factors determine how we become who we are, and even the question how we can influence those factors and those influences. That is not where pedagogy has its focus. Pedagogy is interested in this question, how an I can step forward. And I use the word I, not the word self, because I is a very special word that in a sense we can only use for ourselves. So you can say this is a matter that is very close to us. Benner actually has a very nice phrase to capture what this work of pedagogy is. In German he calls it Aufforderung zur Selbsttätigkeit, which you can translate as sort of the injunction to be self-active. But we have to be very careful here, because this doesn't mean that we say to other people, be yourself and have a good time. What we're actually saying is be a self, be an I. And that, I would say, is the really special work of pedagogy. If we want to put some other language on it, but you see that I'm trying to make the same point in a number of ways. I would say the educational question, or again the question of pedagogy, is an existential question, not in the difficult sort of philosophical sense of existentialist philosophy, although we can go there as well, but in the everyday sense that this question is not the question who we are, and of course we are someone. You can say that's the language of identity. We all have stories to tell about who we are and how we have become who we are. But the educational question, you can say, is the question how we are. It's the question what we do with who we are. It's the question what we do with everything we have learned, with our biological possibilities and impossibilities, with our capacities and our incompetencies. And there you can see the big difference between Rosa Parks and Adolf Eichmann, who both had become someone, but did something very different with what they were able to do. If we want a word for that, and in English these words do not really fit, so I'm curious what the Finnish word is. In German it works quite well, subjektiviteit, which I sort of try to translate into English as subjectness. And it's just to have a different word from identity, but also to say subject is the opposite of object. So the whole point of existing as human beings is that we are not objects, but subjects. We have to lead our own lives. How are you doing so far? Yeah? Okay. Good. So, this is the point I want to bring home, as they say. I would say the educational question is the question of the I. But then we have to be very careful, because we live in a time where everyone wants to be an I and wants to be a big I, where there is also a whole economy that constantly tells us, be your I, and if you have a lot of money, you can become even a bigger I. But the real question of the I is not how the I can be at home. The real question is how the I can exist in the world, where there are a lot of other I's that we meet. So it's not a question of the I on itself, but the question how the I tries to exist in the world. And that's an ongoing challenge, you can say. It's something that's never resolved. Each morning we meet this challenge again. Shall I get out of bed? Shall I get out of the home? Shall I meet the world? Now, one of the questions for this conversation is the question, how does this sit with the school? And if we take that slightly broader, we can ask, where is this question, this concern about the I in the world, where is that in contemporary education? And here I'm not very optimistic, so if you were to ask me, but if you don't ask, I'll tell it anyway. I think the I is really being squeezed out in contemporary education. When you look at, if you still remember that where I started, this story about what is education, the production of measurable learning outcomes, I don't see this whole question of the I in the world in those kind of stories about education. You could even say, if you are on the pessimistic side of the spectrum, and some days I'm on the pessimistic side and other days I'm on the optimistic side, for me there is a real question whether there is still even a place for the child or student in contemporary education. And what I have in mind is trends in education that really strongly focus, you can say, on the curriculum, that argue there is a small set of curriculum areas that matters, and quite often that's language and mathematics and science, academic achievement, and we need to make sure that children learn that and that they score high on that. That's the business of education. And there is an awful lot of measuring going on in education, and I think that is still increasing. Yesterday there was a colleague who was talking about, what was it, precision education, that we're trying to target individuals more and more in all kinds of ways to make sure that they produce what we want. Now, all of this, and this is quite remarkable, I think, in our field, comes out of good intentions. I have never met a single person in education around the world who says, my ambition is to make education worse. So we all want to make education better, but that's where the problem begins, because definitions about what it means to make education better, ways of making education better, not only generate beautiful examples of great education, but also create all this measurement and pressure, where I think students begin to disappear as subjects and increasingly become objects that are managed from the outside. But I also think, and that's a discussion we can come back to if you want to, increasingly we are also asking students to make themselves into objects. We ask our students to manage their own learning, to set their own learning goals, for example. So we put that whole question of management onto students themselves. That's quite a worry. Now you can say, how do we break free from this? And what I think is really interesting is that at many places I see attempts to break away from thinking that education is only a question of managing students as things, you could say. What happens in response to this is what I would call here opportunities in education that allow students to express themselves. We hear a lot about student voice, for example. We hear a lot about the importance that students should be able to make their own sense of the curriculum. There is a whole wave that says there needs to be room for creativity, for giving their own meaning, for students to articulate their own identity. And this happens, I think, in the mainstream of education, but we also see it more on the borders of education, where the arts are brought in, where people are arguing to return to child-centered education, student-centered education, alternative schools that say the curriculum shouldn't decide, but we should put the student in the center. I know even of a lot of universities that say the student is in the center of what we do. Well, when you look carefully, that's not true, but that's another matter. For me, there is the question of pedagogy. Because it sounds good to say we need to create space for students and children to express themselves, but there is a question, I call it the what if question. And what I have in mind is this: it's great if students can have a voice, but what do we do if the voice, say, is racist? It's great to have creativity, but creativity is not just there to build up. There is also creativity that is destructive. The sad truth of the concentration camps was that they were highly creative in thinking, how can we destroy many people with the least cost and effort. So that's creativity as well. Or identity, you can say, yes, it's really important that there is a room for as many identities as possible. But what if some identities say, my identity is the most important one, I don't care about your identity. And this is where I think the work of education or the work of pedagogy is always more difficult than just to say, let's open up, let's create space, let's bring things into motion. So yes, it's important that we create opportunities for students to express themselves, but our work as educators is always to bring in the question whether what arrives in our classrooms, but also what arrives in our own lives, where we begin to get a sense of ourselves, our possibilities, our impossibilities, whether that will help or hinder children or students in their attempts to exist as subject in the world, you could say. That is the work of education. It's not simply to say, let everything grow, flourish, but it's to ask when something emerges, how is that going to help to live life well? And you can say this is what this Aufforderung zur Selbsttätigkeit means. It's not to say just be yourself, just express yourself, and we don't care about what you want to express. But it is to say be a self. Position what you want to bring to the world. Position that in relation to what other people want to bring. And see if we can manage to exist together. For me, this is not curriculum-centered education. It's also not child or student-centered education. But I like the phrase world-centered education, where we say ultimately our job is to bring children not just to school, but from school we want to help them to move into the world, try to be at home in the world. Now, what does it mean to exist in the world? I have a little theory that I find helpful. It's not big, but it gives some language, I think, to be slightly more precise about this whole question of existing in the world. And it starts, you can say, from the recognition that the world is not everything. So when we leave our home, metaphorically, when we try to make a step into the world, you can say at some point we'll meet the world, and we often meet the world through resistance. Yeah, I have a brilliant idea. I go to my work, I talk to colleagues, and they all say, no, I don't think that that's a good idea. So I want something, but I meet a social reality that resists. Or in the encounter with the material world. Yeah? I think I'm a brilliant sculptor, so I find a piece of stone and I have an idea and I start hammering, and suddenly the stone just falls apart because my idea doesn't fit with what the stone would allow me to do. So this experience of resistance, you can say, is a really important experience in this whole challenge of stepping into the world. Because when we encounter resistance, it shows that the world is not a construction, but it exists independently. So I actually think, I'll say a bit more a little later, if time doesn't resist, that the question of the real may be the bigger or the more important question than the question of truth. In our times, I think we're really stuck in the question of truth. but maybe we can break out if we bring it back to the question of the real. What are possible responses when we meet resistance? And this is my little theory. One response is that we say, this is really irritating, I had such a great idea, I meet resistance, I'll start to push harder because I want this idea to come into the world. Now sometimes this is really important. Sometimes we really need to work hard to make things happen. But there is always a risk that if we push too hard, we will destroy the very world in which we want to arrive. Yeah, think of this piece of stone. If we hammer too hard, we will destroy the piece of stone. Or think of the brilliant idea where your colleagues think it's not a good idea. If we keep pushing too hard, we may destroy the whole set of relationships there. So one risk, you can say, when we step into the world, is that we destroy the world. But maybe you recognize the other option, where you encounter resistance and say, oh, this is far too difficult for me, I'm not going to try, I'll back off. Sometimes, again, that is important, where we step back so that there is room for other people or other things to step in. But we have to be mindful that if we step back too far, we completely withdraw ourselves from the world. And we destroy, you can say, ourselves, our possibility to exist as I. Now, if this picture works for you, you can probably see where I'm heading, that the real challenge is not to move to these extremes, where actually either the world disappears or we disappear, but that the challenge of existing in the world is to stay somewhere in this middle ground between world destruction and self-destruction. And this sounds really odd, but hopefully you can see what I'm trying to say. We can call this a place of dialogue, but not dialogue in terms of conversation, or even worse, in terms of babble, but dialogue as a way in which we try to stay with what we are not or who we are not. And that is a lifelong challenge. That, you can say, is the challenge of trying to exist in the world. So this middle ground between world destruction and self-destruction, that, you can say, is the world that Hannah Arendt is also really concerned about. But you can also say that is the place of education, the place of pedagogy, because precisely in that middle ground, we try to exist as an I together with other I's. And why is it an educational space? And here the theme of teaching comes in, because I think that space is a space that teaches us something. It teaches us, for example, that we are not alone in the world, that we are there together with other people who also try to exist in that world. It teaches us that the world is not a construction, but that the world is real. And the ecological crisis is one teaching that we receive there, where the world teaches us you cannot just do anything with me that you want to do. So I would love to see a school that on the front of its building says, welcome, this is the place in between world destruction and self-destruction. I haven't seen it yet, you need a pretty big building to have it, but maybe on a website. I think this is the real message. A lot of websites, but I shouldn't go into that, I think they tell lies. They tell things like, if you bring your child here, we will develop all the talents of the child. That's really dangerous to say that, because there may be beautiful parts in our talents, but there is also a lot of shit, and the whole question is to find the shit and to find the beauty and find the middle ground thing. Okay. Is this being recorded? Did I say it?
Of course.
So I said our work as pedagogues is to arouse a desire to exist in the world. And we have to be careful there because we also meet a lot of young people who actually have that desire. So it's not that we produce that desire, sometimes it's to keep that desire alive. That's somewhere where we work. But I also qualify that by saying it's not just to be in the world, it's to try to be there in a grown-up way. And I like this notion of grown-upness, but it's also a very confusing notion because it has been, you can say, hijacked by developmental psychology that says if you go through the 4 stages of Piaget or the 6 stages of Kohlberg or whatever stage theory you want to put there, at the end of it you will be grown up. And I think that that's not a good way to think about grown-upness, because then it's a kind of possession or a thing that you get and then you have it for the rest of your life. For me, grown-upness is precisely this ongoing challenge to try to exist in the world, to be in the world, not just stay safely at home, but not think of yourself as the center of the world. This is the nice phrase Philippe Mérieux, French pedagogue, has when he says, grown-upness is being in the world without being in the center of the world. So you can say to exist in a grown-up way is to exist in a decentered way, out of center, and if you like to play with language, you could say it's to exist in an eccentric way. So education needs to educate for eccentricity. What does that mean? You could say trying to exist in this grown-up way is never to simply run after your desires, but constantly go back to this question, is what I desire or what I encounter in me as a desire, is that going to help? Is that what I should be desiring for my own life, my life with others, but also on this planet where we know that the planet cannot give us everything we desire. This, you can say, is this irritating educational question that we as pedagogues need to bring in when we create settings where we ask our students, okay, express yourself, take a step into the world. Then our task is to bring this question to that and say, let's look carefully at what is emerging and see what of that is going to help and what of that is going to hinder. And that is, you can say, an irritating question. That is an interruptive question. And you can say our work as pedagogues has this interruptive quality. So it's quite difficult work. We are not the nice people who say everything is fine. We are the people who constantly say, don't forget this question. It interrupts desire so that we can have an honest look at our desires. It interrupts our desire of just trying to be with ourselves. It interrupts identity. Think again about what happened with Rosa Parks and Adolf Eichmann. They both had an identity, but the I in relation to that was very different. It interrupts the natural order. So we cannot say I was not responsible because my genetic makeup made me like this and I have nothing to do with it. And it also interrupts the social order. So it's quite serious work we do as pedagogues. Now it's really important that when we try to get a handle on our work from this angle, that we don't fall in the trap of saying our work is to suppress desires. I don't know whether I'm going to offend people. It's meant as a light remark, but I think in Catholic pedagogy, the idea was that desires were bad, and if you get rid of all your desires, then you are in heaven. Now the problem is we are not in heaven, we are here on the earth together, so we need our desires in order to manage to exist together in that world. So our work as educators is not to say to our students, get rid of your desires, but it's to look at all the desires, everything that gives energy, and try to figure out what is going to help and what is not going to help. Examining desires, selecting desires, rearranging desires, transforming desires, constantly with this question, can it help us to exist in the world in a grown-up way? Now, the quick claim I want to make here, but it's all open for discussion, is that I would say this work is the emancipatory work of education. And emancipation has a long and beautiful tradition, and you gave a very nice overview yesterday in the seminar. There are all kinds of views about emancipation. One is to say we need emancipation from external oppression. There is something there. Or we need emancipation from false consciousness. We have wrong ideas and we need to get the right ideas. I wish to suggest that one kind of emancipation that we also need, you can say, is emancipation from what we could call infantile desires, the desire to just be with yourself, put no limits on your desires, in order to find a kind of sovereignty, you could say, a relationship with our desires, rather than that we are just determined by our desires. I put infantile here in quotation marks because I do not want to give children a bad name. And I do want to give some grown-ups a bad name, because when I look at the news in the morning, the newspaper and on the internet, I see actually a lot of examples of people who are so-called grown-up, who have been on the earth for a long time, who are still just running behind our desires and never ask a question of the perspective on their desires. I'm even inclined to think that one of those people has become president of the United States of America. So there is a problem there. On the other hand, I come in schools where I find small people who have just been here for a short number of years, who actually are really capable of this decentered existence, of not putting themselves in the center, but making place for others. But that's why we shouldn't say, when you're old, you fix this, when you're young, you have no idea of what it is. Why is this an important question? On the one hand, you can say, this is the human question. We need ourselves with our desires, with our energy, with our freedom. And the question is, how can we make sure that that freedom doesn't end up destroying the world or ourselves, but ends up in living together well, you could say. But there is also interesting work, particularly this book by an American author, Paul Roberts, who says our time has actually become a time, he calls it an impulse society, and he particularly refers to contemporary economy, where he says in order for contemporary economies to grow, they need to constantly make sure that we desire more. I put my telephone away, but the best example of this is Apple. Apple doesn't sell mobile phones. What Apple sells, and this is brilliant, is the desire for a new mobile phone. That is their business model. And they sell this desire for free. But once that desire has sort of arrived via the back door inside of us, then suddenly we think that we need the latest mobile phone. So we have an economy that can only grow if it constantly tells us this message: you need to desire more, you need to desire more stuff. And the planet, of course, is collapsing under this economic model. But what Roberts really shows in his book is that he says, we have therefore created a society that is precisely not interested in us asking questions about our desires. So it's a society that actually doesn't want us to exist in a grown-up way. It's a society, an economic system that wants us to remain infantile. And that is why this whole question, I think, of the relationship to our desires is a much bigger question now that has to do with unsustainable economic systems, but also unsustainable ecological systems. The subtitle of the book is very nice, The Impulse Society, What is Wrong with Getting What We Want? And you probably see that if we just try to get what we want, we end up in all the problems where also education tries to do so. So if this is the terrain of our work as pedagogues, what then does that work look like? That's the last thing I'll try to give some thoughts on in my talk. Am I okay with time still? Yeah? Are you still okay with your energy?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Do you desire more?
Yes.
I just want to highlight 3 qualities of the work of pedagogy. And by highlighting these qualities, you'll probably see that they are the opposite of where a lot of thinking about schooling is currently going. So the first thing that is important is that we understand that our work is interruptive work. Interrupting desires, not to destroy the desires of our students, but to help our students to come into a relationship with their desires. Interrupting our desire to be at home, to just stick with our identity and never ask, what am I going to do with that identity, and so on. Interruptive work means that the work of pedagogy needs to bring resistance into the classroom, needs to bring resistance into all kinds of pedagogical settings. It's really interesting to look back at the settings of social pedagogy and the forms of resistance we create to get something going. Art does quite a lot there, I think. It is important, and here I think lies an important professional dimension of this work of pedagogues, that we understand that there are uneducational interruptions and educational interruptions. So just to think if we interrupt, we're fine, that's not our work. Our work is always to find sort of the interruptions, the moments that slow down, that make an encounter with reality possible. Interruptions that are orientated towards the grown-upness of the students we work with. You can say, if that language appeals to you, we constantly try to open up little spaces in which the I can step forward. But it's always for the student whether they will step forward or not. But our work is to create very special spaces where that might happen. And this is where equality comes into our work, because this challenge to exist as an I is a challenge for everyone. So this is the most equalizing thing we do as educators, by saying, yes, for everyone there is the question, what will you do when I ask, where are you? Now I think this is why parents speak to their newborn baby. They don't speak with the intention of communication. They speak because they address the baby as a subject, not as an object. And I think that's actually a remarkable quality of speech. Outside of communication, the whole thing of speaking to someone is that in that gesture you say, you are a subject. From my perspective, you are a subject. And when someone speaks back, you can say something happens there. In my latest book, I look into this, and I use a strange phrase where I say we ask the impossible here. Because quite often in educational situations with young children, but also with teenagers or students in higher education, we approach them as subject, but often a lot of the evidence we have goes against it. Yeah, when you diagnose children, or when you look at their background, or when you know things that have gone wrong, you could say, I don't think, looking at all the evidence, that, for example, this student is really ready to take responsibility. But if we wait until we have all the evidence that the student is ready, then we can wait for eternity. But by constantly putting this possibility back and say, I trust you, and it's over to you what you do with that you can say is the educational work. So in a sense, we go against all evidence. We ask the impossible. There are beautiful little examples in the history of pedagogy of what it means to open up this space. A really nice story from Homer Lane, an American educator who worked with teenagers with very difficult backgrounds, criminal convictions, and he wanted to give them another opportunity to exist as subject. He tells the story of a boy in his residential school who had broken a vase, and he heard that the boy was boasting to other students there, I've broken this vase, and I know that Homer Lane, it was really a special vase for him, but I've dared to do this. So you can say, here this boy steps forward in a very interesting way. And then Homer Lane calls the boy, and you can see that one thing Homer Lane could do is that he could have said, this is really bad what you did, I'm going to punish you. But that is a destructive act that I think educationally hardly ever works. And of course the boy already knows that what he did was something he shouldn't have done. Homer Lane did something else that probably looked a bit like this, where he said, here I have a watch. This watch is really precious to me as well. Would you like to destroy that also? And you can say that is this little gesture where Homer Lane opens this space, where the boy again can step in as an eye either that wants to make another destructive act, or an eye that says, I've had enough, I no longer want to go. Jacques Rancière has another nice phrase where he says, what we do here in a sense is to deny students the satisfaction of not being a subject. That's another way to think about what it means to open this space. I encounter a lot of students in higher education in Britain where they have to pay a lot to be in university, and they say to me, we've paid £9,000, you're going to make sure that I will succeed at the end of the year. And that's really strange, because what students are saying there, they're saying, I'm not here as a subject, I'm an object, and you're going to manage me. And that's a very easy position where you say, I have no responsibility, you do it for me. And Rancière then says, what's the educational thing we do there? we say to our students, or in all kinds of ways, we deny them actually that pleasure of not having to be there as a subject. So our work is in a sense really small, but I think in the small things something really significant happens. So our work is interruptive rather than that it's just keeping everything flowing. I don't like the word flow, therefore. This work takes time, and therefore the second quality of the work of pedagogy is that it's suspending work where we try to make time, provide space, architecture is really important, spaces, and create forms, curriculum, where we can meet the world and meet ourselves and our desires in relation to the world, and then get processes going. And this is work that takes time, but also form. The Indian scholar, Acharya Spivak, says what we do there is to help our students in meeting their desires and then begin to rearrange those desires. She calls it a non-coercive rearrangement of desires, and that is true. We can never force our students to rearrange their desires, but that doesn't mean that it's easy or pleasurable work. Rearranging our desires can be quite tough. Again, I think there are wonderful examples in the history of education of pedagogues who understand that this is the dynamics of real pedagogical work. Janusz Korczak, who worked in a school with orphans in the Jewish ghetto in Russia, he really understands what this is. A.S. Nielsen in our school, another example. So there are good examples. There is something nice, and this brings me to the word school, because school, again, in its original Greek meaning, means free time. And I think it's important to reclaim that meaning of school, where we do not think, first of all, of school as an institution, but school as the time we try to set free for the meeting of our desires and ourselves in relation to our desires. So rather than to think of the school as an institution, I'm suggesting that we should think, first of all, when we use the word school, as a principle. The principle of freeing up time for education. If this is the work of pedagogy, interruptive, slowing down, confrontational, you could say, it is important that we support the students we bring to that place. So the pedagogue who brings the children to the school should also help that children can manage to stay in that place. Support for staying in the difficult middle ground, often because what we encounter there as students in the situation is often not that attractive in the short term, but may become quite significant in the longer term. We can't see that in the short term. So you can say the pedagogue is not just the one who brings the children to school, to this free time where education can happen. The job of the pedagogue is also to help the child, the students, to stay in this free, slow down time. When we think of school in that way, I'm almost done, then we can ask a really interesting question about the school as institution, namely whether in the school as institution there is still opportunity for school as principle. Whether in the schools that we have there is still this free, slow, pedagogical time, or whether the school has become such a speedy institution that school cannot happen inside the school. If you can follow, yeah, you can follow, yeah. That's my suggestion for world-centered education. So if we keep focusing just on the child that needs to learn or just on the curriculum that needs to go in, we may be missing that. But if we see that the school as the place where we can encounter the world, begin to ask not just the question, how can we develop, but what kind of limits do we need to acknowledge and make real in how we want to grow and flourish and live, then maybe school can happen inside the school. But if we come to the conclusion that the modern school no longer has a place for this free time, then social pedagogy, understood as pedagogy that is enacted in different places, becomes even more urgent. If the school can no longer be an educational institution, then the question is, can education still happen in other places? And that is of crucial importance. This is partly this idea of the rediscovery of teaching. The whole question of teaching is not so much the question what we teach, but it's the question, can we be taught? Can we meet reality and come up with this question, how we relate to reality, not destroying it, but also not walking away from it? That brings in an interesting question, because again, much policy constantly asks this question, what kind of school does society need? Society apparently has all kinds of needs, and the school needs to fulfill those needs. Yeah, if there's a problem with citizenship, we need citizenship education. If there's a problem with the environment, we need environmental education. If there's a problem with relationships, we need relationships education. But the other question is often forgotten. What kind of society do we actually need so that the school can be an educational space and not just this system of control? So it's a question that goes back to society. Final point, and this is just my hobby horse, is all this a matter of understanding? Is our work to help our students to understand all this better? And here there is a remarkable passage, and we are back with Hannah Arendt, who says, what is understanding? Understanding is an unending activity, so it never comes to an end, by which, in constant change and variation, we come to terms with and reconcile ourselves to reality, that is, try to be at home in the world. And I find this a beautiful redefinition of understanding, where understanding is not about sense-making, interpretation, construction, but where understanding brings us back to the biggest challenge we face as human beings, try to be at home in the world. So we often meet, what is it? Nervous students who constantly have, I don't understand, how can I make sense of this, what can I learn from this? And one thing we need to do is say, wait a minute, that's what you want, but when you meet the reality, maybe there's also another question. What is this situation asking from me? What is this trying to say to me? What is the world trying to teach me? And again, you can say, that is the question of equality. That's it. So I would say, stop making sense and get alive, and then we should be fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. And now Kirsi Vaistelan, she has prepared a commentary note for this lecture, and she is going to give it in Finnish. Eli vaihdamme suomen kieleen, mutta me olemme myös järjestäneet tulkin meidän vieraallemme Paula. Eli olemme pyytäneet tosiaan Kirsin kommenttipuheenvuoron suomeksi siksi, että Kirsi myös tuo tähän englanninkieliseen luentoon, jos jotain meni meiltä ohi, niin lisää ymmärrystä.
Okay, thank you, Professor Biesta. Gert Biestan puheenvuoro ja hänen uusin teoksensa The Rediscovery of Teaching, johon tämä minun kommenttipuheenvuoroni pääasiallisesti pohjaa, pureutuivat kiinnostavalla ja puhuttelevalla tavalla opettamisen, opettajan ja ylipäätään koko kasvatustehtävän merkityksen ja tärkeyden löytämiseen uudelleen. Näkökulma tämän päivän kouluinstituution ja koulutuksen rooliin yhteiskunnassa pohjaa kriittisen kasvatusfilosofian. Pohjavireenä kulkee filosofian kielellä ilmaistuna ajatus siitä, että kasvatuksen ydintehtävä nykyisessä globaalien ekologisten kriisien ja kapitalismin logiikan mukaan jäsenneltyjen elämänpiirien maailmanajassa tulisi olla ihmisen maailmansuhteen ja vastuun uudelleenmäärittely. Tässä tehtävässään kouluinstituutio ei Biestan mukaan ole onnistunut. Opetusta on pidetty kasvatuksellisessa prosessissa kautta aikojen enemmän tai vähemmän tärkeänä ja merkityksellisenä tekijänä. Se, mitä kulloinkin on pidetty opetustehtävässä olennaisena ja mitä varten opettaminen on tärkeää, on vaihdellut aikansa olosuhteiden ja ihanteiden mukaan. Aina on kuitenkin kyse ihmisyyden ennakoinnista, siitä, mikä on se olio, jota kasvatus ja opetus koskevat. Kasvatusmaailman muuttuminen on välttämättä myös siis sen käsityksen muuttumista, keitä kasvatettavat ovat, keitä kasvatettavilla halutaan tehdä, sekä keiden yhteiskuntaa ja millaista yhteiskuntaa kasvatuksella pyritään edistämään. Biesta nostaa esiin kiinnostavan dilemman, joka liittyy nykyiseen opetuksesta käytyyn keskusteluun. Hän sanoi, että ne, jotka ovat kiinnostuneita opettamisesta, eivät ole todellisuudessa kiinnostuneita opiskelijoiden vapaudesta, ja ne, jotka ovat kiinnostuneita opiskelijoiden vapaudesta, näkevät opettamisen esteenä sille. Tähän tilanteeseen Biesta etsii kolmatta vaihtoehtoa. Opettamisella olisi tärkeä, jopa olennainen rooli kasvatustehtävässä, jonka tehtävänä ja tähtäimenä on inhimillinen vapaus, emansipaatio. Ajattelen omakohtaisen opettajan urani ja tutkimustyöni kautta, että yhtenä esteenä Biestan tavoitteelle on se, että koulun kasvatustoimintaa, samoin kuin opettajan koulutusta, on pitkään ohjannut yksilöpsykologinen ja järjestelmää palvelevan kasvatustieteen eetos. Tällä on nähdäkseni ollut kaksisuuntainen vaikutus. Ensinnäkin yhteiskunnalliset rakenteet ja vallan mekanismit jäävät helposti piiloon. Kun opetusta, oppilasta ja koulun kasvatustoimintaa tutkitaan ja katsellaan psykologisen ja järjestelmää palvelevan kasvatustieteen kehikon kautta, alkavat itsestäänselvinä pidetyt uskomusjärjestelmät vahvistua. Suunnitelmat, raportit ja tilastot tuottavat tehokkaan tuotantokoneiston tavoin toimivan koulutusjärjestelmän huoltamiseen sopivaa ja julkista päätöksentekoa sekä elinkeinoelämää hyödyttävää välineellistä tietoa. Kansallinen koulutusjärjestelmä ja sen mukana opettajan rooli ovat heiluneet innovaatiopolitiikan tuuliviirin puuskissa milloin minnekin. Koulutuksen kehittämispaineet ja opettajan roolin uudelleen määrittelyt ovat ainakin osittain olleet valtioiden välisen talouskilpailun ja tähän liittyvän retorisen kamppailun seurausta. Toinen seikka liittyy oppimiskäsitykseen ja opettajan rooliin. Biesta nimittää nykyistä konstruktivistisen oppimiskäsityksen aikakauttamme termillä the learnification of education. Oppiminen on nostettu opettamisen edelle ja koulun toiminta valjastettu yksinomaan yksilöllisen oppimisen edistämiseen. Oppilaista ja opiskelijoista puhutaan oppijoina ja kouluista oppimisympäristöinä, opettajat taas ovat oppimisen ohjaajia. Suomessa peruskouluissa pari vuotta sitten käyttöön otettu uusi perusopetuksen opetussuunnitelma vilisee oppimisen taitojen tai oppimisprosessin itseohjautuvuuden ihanteita ja tavoitteita. Toisaalta on myös niin, että kun kasvatettava tulee määritellyksi psykologisen mittarein niin sanotun normaaliuden tai sen, mikä on keskivertoa kautta, voidaan alkaa tehdä jakoja ja erittelyjä, yksilöllisiä oppimispolkuja, jotka palvelevat opetuksen tehostamista. Biesta myöntää, että yritys löytää ja elvyttää opettaminen ja opetuksen merkitys tällä oppimisen aikakaudella on ongelmallinen. Ajatus vaikuttaa epätrendikkäältä erityisesti sen konservatiivisuuden vuoksi, sillä tällaiset yritykset on perusteltu usein kontrollin näkökulmasta. Parhaimpina ja tehokkaimpina opettajina pidetään niitä, jotka osaavat ohjata kasvatuksellisia prosesseja kohti ennalta määritettyjä oppimistuloksia ja identiteettejä, sellaisia kuten hyvät kansalaiset tai joustavat elinikäiset oppijat. Myös tutkimuksen keinoin pyritään tuottamaan evidenssiä sille, mikä toimisi parhaiten suhteessa näihin tavoitteisiin. On syntynyt globaali kasvatuksen mittausteollisuus, joka innokkaasti mittaa, kontrolloi ja pyrkii osoittamaan, mikä systeemi tuottaa halutut lopputulokset ja mitkä kouluuudistukset kasvattaisivat kansallista kilpailukykyämme. Ajatus kasvatuksesta kontrollina ja opettajasta kontrollin edustajana liittyy myös huoleen, että nykyyhteiskunta potisi jonkinlaista auktoriteetin puutetta. Opetus nähdään keskeisenä välineenä palauttaa tämä kadonnut auktoriteetti, siinä samalla myös opettajalle. Näissä keskusteluissa unohdetaan kuitenkin se, että auktoriteetti on pohjimmiltaan suhteisiin perustuva asia. Se ei ole mitään sellaista, mitä joku henkilö voisi vain yksinkertaisesti asettaa toiseen henkilöön, kuten Biesta sanoo. Miksi on sitten ongelmallista, että opetus ja kasvatus on sidottu nykyisin niin tiukasti yksilölliseen oppimiseen, suorittamisen ohjaamiseen, vertailevan edistyksen, kilpailun ja markkinahenkisen yhteiskuntamoraalin tarkoitusperiin? Kun kasvatustehtävässä keskitytään yksinomaan yksilön potentiaalin, oppimistulosten ja menestyksen tavoitteluun ja mittaamiseen, nähdään kasvatettava subjektien sijaan objekteina, jota muokataan, koulutetaan tiettyyn suuntaan. Kasvatustehtävä ja kasvatettava näyttäytyvät välineellisinä. Myös se, että kasvatettava kohotetaan yksilönä kaiken keskipisteeksi, saa hänet pahimmillaan vetäytymään sisäänpäin egoismiin ja elämään elämää vain itsensä kanssa ja itseään varten. Tämä estää häntä kasvamasta subjektiuteensa täyteen aikuisuuteensa. Aikuisuudella tai täysikasvuisuudella Biesta ei tarkoita tässä yhteydessä kehityksellistä vaihetta tai kehityskaaren lopputulosta, vaan on kyse eräänlaisesta olemassaolon ominaisuudesta tai tavasta. Täysikasvuinen tapa olla olemassa ja elää subjektina on avoimuutta sille, kuka ja mitä toinen on. Se on elämistä dialogin tilassa toisen kanssa, toiseuden tunnustamista. Dialogin tilassa annamme sen, kuka ja mitä toinen on, koskettaa, puhutella ja opettaa meitä. Eläminen subjektina tarkoittaa siksi, että sitoudumme jatkuvasti pohtimaan kysymystä siitä, onko se, mitä minä haluan, toivottavaa. Mitä haluni tarkoittaa oman elämäni kannalta, entä muiden ihmisten elämää ja koko planeettaa ajatellen? Aikuinen tapa olla olemassa tunnustaa, että maailma ei ole meidän tekemämme maailma, ei myöskään käytettävissämme, eli emme voi tehdä sillä mitä haluamme tai mistä tykkäämme. Maailma viittaa tässä sekä luonnolliseen että sosiaaliseen maailmaan, sekä asioiden että olentojen maailmaan. Tämänkaltainen ymmärrys on jännitteisessä suhteessa aikamme impulssiyhteiskunnan suureen periaatteeseen, missä vapautemme inhimillisenä subjektina on pääasiassa käsitetty valinnanvapautena. Vapautena tehdä, omistaa, olla, ostaa ja seurata halujamme. Biesta haluaa nyt siis elvyttää opettamisen ja kutsuu opettajia mukaan kasvatustehtävään, jonka tähtäimenä on inhimillinen vapaus, emansipaatio. Ei moraalisoimaan, vaan johdattamaan kasvatettavaa kohti maailmakeskeisyyttä, maailmaan, mutta ei sen keskipisteeksi. Pohtimaan kasvatettavan kanssa ei niinkään sitä, kuka minä olen, vaan miten minä olen. Johdattamaan kasvatettavaa kohti täysikasvuista subjektiviteettiaan. Miksi tämä on sitten niin tärkeää erityisesti näinä aikoina? Aikamme länsimaisen ihmiskuvan perusta on syntynyt pitkälti uusliberalistisen hegemonian tuotoksena. Se perustuu individualismiin, ajatukseen yksilötason ensisijaisuudesta ja erityisyydestä sekä siihen, että minä on ympäristöstä riippumaton. Tämä ajattelu on johtanut solidaarisuusvajeeseen ja siihen, että sivuutamme toisten kokemukset. Sivuutamme myös muun ympäristöt, ekologiat ja lajit, jotka kuitenkin ilmaston muuttuessa vaatisivat huomiomme. Jo nyt on nähtävissämme seuraukset esimerkiksi kasvavan rasismin ja lisääntyvien ympäristökatastrofien muodoissa. Viimeistään nyt olisi aika herätä ja huomata, että kuulumme samaan elämän verkkoon, ja jos tuhoamme sitä, tuhoamme myös omaa elämäämme, kuten empatiatutkijat Elisa Aaltola ja Sami Keto kirjoittavat. Tässä kasvatustehtävässä sosiaalipedagogisella ajattelulla ja työllä olisi oma, aivan erityinen asemansa koulun ja koulutuksen ympäristöissä toimiessa ja niiden toimintaa kehitettäessä. Kiitos.
Kiitos Kirsi. Ja nyt päästään keskustelevampaan ja toiminnallisempaan osuuteen. Eli jos joku haluaa käyttää puheenvuoron, esittää kommentteja tai kysymyksiä, niin yhteisellä ponnistelulla saamme ehkä tämän mikrofonin siirtymään kysyjän luokse. Myös takarivistä saa esittää. Katsotaan, minkälainen pallotteluhetki me saadaan aikaiseksi. Mutta älkää tuotta vielä poistuko. Tässä on kiinnostava osuus vielä jäljellä. Eli voitte esittää kysymyksiä suomeksi tai englanniksi ihan, tai ruotsiksi. Katsotaan, miten tulkki selviää. Tämä oli helppo näin. Thank you.
It's about why the I is not the self. You asked in the beginning a question about why the parents talk to their newborn children. And I had an answer, and you gave an answer in the end. And there's something about when we, and I quote, arouse a desire to wanting to exist in the world in a grown-up way, we do it also as parents, but we do it in the safe home. So that's why the question is not the impossible. It is the possible. And why it is the possible, it highlights the difference between as the I and the self, and as it highlights the difference between the safeness at home and education. And it also argues why teaching matters. Thank you.
Was there a question?
I think that's a good addition. And it indeed raises the question also of the conditions under which we can do this educational work. And those are important as well. So
and also that we are not educators when we act as parents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
More questions, comments? Eturivi aktivoitu, koittakaa sillä taaempanakin. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. So I work with vocational education, and it's particularly interesting to me to think about it perhaps in a rather antagonistic manner, but to think about like who has the privilege of developing the I, and how does the sort of instrumental value attributed to students in vocational education sort of, how is this in relation to students who have the privilege of developing themselves in a sort of more perhaps roundabout way, where there's more possibility within the curriculum, or in general like the sort of social orientation. I'm talking about kind of in Finland, for example, high school. So there's a lot more opportunity there to explore the I within the school setting. But what we see, I think, in vocational education is the sort of, I would call it the hyper-learnification these outcomes, and it's very much tied to the economy and to the way it's sort of I think we're seeing the biggest squeeze is sort of happening there, and I was just wondering, what do you think about this?
It's a good question. So I understand the reality where a lot of vocational education is squeezed much more than other parts, say, of secondary education, and that is unfortunate, because I'm inclined to think that vocational education is more real than a lot of, say, grammar schools or upper secondary academic curricula. And I try to highlight that actually the encounter with reality is the most important thing. So if we think that the question of the I, and I'm putting a bit too much in what you said, is a question sort of talking a lot or navel gazing, that I think it's precisely not. So before you know it, then the I becomes the curriculum, you could say, and the I becomes the reality, but then there is no reality. This is also, I think, the criticism when education becomes therapeutic, then it's only about the I and whether the I feels well. So all these concerns about well-being, they're real concerns, but at the same time, before you know it, you're somewhere else. What I really value about vocational education, my own background as a teacher is also in vocational education, is that it's real from day one. If vocational education goes well, it's real from day one. So you work with metal, and metal is not everything. Or you work with wood, or you work with care for people, and you're immediately faced with that reality. Now, for me, I think that's the more real education, whereas a lot of, what in many countries is valued as higher than vocational education is actually quite poor education, because it's mental, conceptual, but not real. So in my ideal world, but that could also be a dangerous world, I would really put that hierarchy on its head and say, it's really sad that in secondary education we need special schools for children who can only think and can only do conceptual work, but are not really ready to face the real world. Yeah, that's the part we should be concerned about. And what should be at the center are all these young people who are also in the middle of economic realities, for example, and actually are pretty well able to cope with that. So I would also like to think very differently about what's happening there. But it has a lot to do with that the I is never a reflective thing on itself, but the I has to exist in the world. So it's when you begin to meet the world, then the whole question of the I becomes a real question. That's where I would go.
Thank you. More comments, questions? Right.
Anyone wants to destroy my watch?
Okay, now there's a challenge. Please help me.
Thank you for a super interesting talk. I just wanted to ask, when you said about how when the ideas that start to come out, so the I that comes out maybe has a racist idea, maybe is destructive and harmful to others. And of course, as educators, we have a responsibility to somehow interrupt that and to look at it again. And I'm just thinking, I agree in many ways, but I'm struggling to see actually where are we drawing our values from the basis to actually say that's a problematic point of view, even if it is problematic.
Yeah, I think that's a good question that we need to ask, and then need to move beyond that, because before we know it, you end up in a kind of value relativism, and I think our world is suffering from that, simply to say, yeah, there are right-wing values and left-wing values, and they're both values, and everyone has a right to have their own values. You can say that's precisely the problem, and one way to name that problem is to say values are not things that float nowhere, so there is always the question, what are the real consequences of values? So I know I'm putting quite a lot on this encounter with reality, but I think there is something there. The other maybe point of orientation is historical. I keep coming back to two little phrases. One is an essay by Theodor Adorno, Education After Auschwitz, where he says the first demand upon education in our time, so this is a historical response, is that he says that Auschwitz will never happen again. And for me, that's part of the history we stand in. And it then begins to raise questions about, well, so how do we look at all the values or all the things that people want to bring in the world? But I also find it important to put next to that Primo Levi, who says Auschwitz has happened, and therefore it can happen again. So where Adorno says it should not happen again, Levi says, yeah, we know that, but still we carry deep down inside of us this possibility that it will happen again. And for me, that to put that on the table as well, at least gives what we do educationally a particular location in place and time. And there, I think we can begin to address these questions. But if we wait for the absolute value to come down from heaven, we've seen that too many times, and it creates more problems.
More comments, questions? It seems that we are pretty happy with what we have done. And we have understood most of it because there's no confusion in there. So
Okay.
let's do a bit.
Good. Thanks very much.
And now time for lunch.